Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, elevating your impact through valuable insights and conversations about leadership. Welcome back to another episode of the McCoy Leadership Podcast, and today we have Zoe Thompson with us. Zoe has many years of experience, 20 years of experience being a police officer, including senior leadership and business change roles. Zoe, it is so great to have you here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you ended up where you are today and dealing with leadership?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. So, in a nutshell, I'll try and keep this as succinct as possible, and then I'm sure your questions will dig into it a little bit more. So, I started working for the police at 18. I always wanted to be a police officer. Here in the UK, you can't apply to be a police officer until you're 18 and a half. And one of the things that they ask is that you have life experience. So when I finished school, I got a job at the local police station, so civilian role. And the aim was to work in that role, gain the life experience so that when the recruitment process opened, I would be in a good position to apply. So I did apply. But didn't get through. So I failed the recruitment process by a couple of marks on one of the psychometric tests, which I will always wonder what would have happened had things have gone in a different way, because that really set my career off in terms of leadership. So I didn't get through to the police, was absolutely gutted for not having that opportunity to be a police officer. But very shortly afterwards, an opportunity came up to apply for a team leader position, which I went for. And that then really started off the leadership journey. So out of the 20 years that I worked for the police, 15 of those were in leadership roles, and certainly the last 10 were in senior leadership. So out of the 20 years, the majority of my time in the police service was as a civilian, but in leadership roles. So when my role was made redundant back in 2017, and I looked at, okay, what do I do? What do I do now? Because I haven't ever worked for anybody else. And actually at that time, it felt like starting a new business was the better option than going through a recruitment process and working for somebody else. So slightly naive as to what is required to run a business. However, I'm quite glad actually that I didn't know too much, because it didn't stop me from just leaping into it. So I've been working as a coach and trainer for the last 8 years now. I do leadership training and coaching, and also support individuals, some of them who are also business owners, to find aligned success. So success, as I say, that feels as good as it looks, because I think we can have success that doesn't feel good. We need to have success that is aligned with what's most important to us. So whether that's through leadership work or through sort of the private one-to-one coaching, that's the common and golden thread that runs through it all.
So you mentioned as you started your new business that maybe it wasn't all sunshine and roses at the very beginning, which I think many of us find out as we go through and start our first business. And it doesn't matter, first, second, third. Many of us aren't smart enough to stop at any point in time. So with that, you continued to move forward and you continued to strive, and now you're 8 years in and you have a good client base and you have lots of material out there. You mentioned, going through the recruitment process for the police. You didn't get in on the first round, but you continued to move forward and you continued to do things. You also, personally, I believe, have done some international strongwoman competitions as well, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And I'm guessing that requires a lot of training, and I'm guessing there might have been some bumps in the road along the way to get there. Mm. So out of all of those, I'm seeing a common theme that you have the tenacity to move forward in any situation. But through all of those, how has that shaped you as a leader today?
It's a great question. I love that you called it tenacity, because my friends and family would probably use the word stubborn, headstrong and stubborn. And I think that's a big part of it. But actually, in terms of leadership, I think that's probably been one of the things that is an overplayed strength for me when it comes to leadership. So I think it's a great personal attribute to have, that tenacity, that headstrong stubbornness. I said I'm going to do it, so I'm going to make it happen. But actually in leadership, I've found that that's probably been one of the elements that I've really had to have that awareness around, because whilst it's a great personal strength for me, actually in a leadership role, we can't always do that. And we need to know when to stop and when to slow down and when to maybe take a different direction. And I think a big part of leadership is also listening to your team and listening to your experts who help guide those decisions. And I think sometimes the tenacity and being headstrong means that sometimes you really want to push through and you want to keep driving people forward, when actually what if you listen to the room and you read the room, they're telling you something different. So I think whilst it's been a huge strength for me as an individual, it's definitely been something that I've had to keep in balance as a leader.
That makes sense. And I'm curious at you thinking about balance and those types of things. I've often heard people say, which I would argue, but I've often heard people say, in order to be successful, you have to give up other things. And through your success, is there anything that you've learned or anything that you had to give up along the way that, looking back as you're coaching people today, you would say, you don't have to do that?
I think I think it's more to do with, it's the term, isn't it? Give up. Because to give up means, I think in my interpretation, giving up almost means to sacrifice or to compromise. And I think for me, it hasn't ever felt like giving up. It's been more around prioritization. Okay, what is most important to me right now? So I guess it's how you look at it. I think for me, it's never felt like giving up. It's been more about pushing other things to the top. And for me, making that decision about what is most important to me right now, you don't have an endless pot of time or energy or money. So you have to prioritize what's most important. So I think naturally other things have dropped lower. But that hasn't been the focus. The focus hasn't been on what's dropped down. It's been more about what's been pushed up to the top and where I've wanted to focus my time and energy. I mean, for me, one of the things that I talk about in particular with clients is the power of and, because I think you can have this and that. I don't think with a lot of things it needs to be a choice. You don't need to choose this or that. You can have both. I mean, I had a career where I moved up through the ranks in the police force whilst being a single parent. I competed at an international level whilst working full-time and parenting. I run a business and I travel and I enjoy my weekends and lots of things that I enjoy doing. I think when you're very clear on what is a priority and you create space and structure to protect what's most important, it doesn't feel like you're missing out on things. It feels like your focus is where you are choosing it to be, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And I often tell people when we talk about priorities that part of creating priorities is that they can change on a minute by minute basis, but obviously we need more than a minute to do something in most cases. But what I mean is my priority at 10:30 Eastern Time, U.S. right now is having a conversation with Zoe Thompson. So there's nothing else going on in the world right now for me. But when I'm done, my priority may change to picking up my daughter from school or, whatever that next thing is. And so it's understanding what our priorities are at each phase of our day, at each phase of our week, and being able to change between them. Interestingly, which I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are around this. I was just recently having a conversation. My wife is a school teacher, and we were talking about accountability. Back up. We were talking about critical thinking within elementary school students, and she explained to me that they offer critical thinking as part of their curriculum. And I said, well, what does critical thinking mean to you? And she gave me a definition. And I kind of shook my head and I said, that's not critical thinking in our world, in business, and in the real world. Critical thinking is more about solving problems and thinking forward and being proactive and doing those things. And also understanding what I boiled it down to is, I think what we need to teach young people is there is a time to be a follower and a time to be a leader. If somebody's in charge, you now take the helper role. And then there's also a time for you to be in charge, and there are going to be other helpers. So you have to learn how to go back and forth with those priorities depending on where you are and what you're doing. And I'm curious, in your world, working with your clients, do you see that as well, where sometimes it's about them being able to switch priorities or switch from being the helper or the leader to the helper?
I think it's a good mix and a good combination of both. I think it's really important to be very clear on the direction, because that's what helps set the priorities. I think priorities will change. I think it's also important when you're setting your day to decide and determine what your priorities are. Otherwise, you become busy with the things that aren't the priorities, and then it's not a very efficient or effective way of showing up. So I think in terms of roles, I think sometimes we need to step forward and sometimes we step back. And I think sometimes we need to listen and understand somebody else's direction because they have more experience or that's the position that they are in. But I think even as a follower, I think we also have a role to ask those challenging questions to make sure that the leader is also a critical thinker. So I share this story because it sticks out in my mind. I heard a speaker, and it was a number of years ago, and I remember them saying that if you as a leader have a room, a boardroom full of people, and they are not questioning or challenging, then you've either recruited mini versions of you who think like you, who will make the same decisions as you, or you have created a culture and a space where people don't feel safe to be able to speak up and challenge and ask questions and to create that critical thinking environment. So I think there is a role as a follower to follow the lead of somebody else, but I think even the followers need to be critical thinkers and ask those challenging questions to help the leader be at their best. I think as a leader, certainly in roles that I've had, there were roles that I worked in the police where I didn't have any experience of working in that department. I certainly wasn't a subject matter expert in that department and what their roles and responsibilities were. But I had 3 excellent managers who knew that business inside and out. And they didn't need me to know the business. They didn't need me to be a subject matter expert. That's exactly what they were there for. What they needed was for me to be able to make those decisions with the big picture in mind. So I think you need people within your team to have that trust in your decision making, but you also need to listen to what the information that they feed into you to help you to make the better decisions.
Yes, one of my favorite sayings, and I might not get this perfectly correct, but in order to be a good listener, you then need to do something with the information. So many times we're listening with intent of what we're going to say next or do next. And so we don't do anything with that information. So being a good listener means we at least need to do something. We need to say no, say yes, but we need to acknowledge it and do something. So your work, for the most part, targets people that are already successful. So why in the world do they need you if they're already successful?
Well, I would say, in the wise words of Marshall Goldsmith, what got you here won't get you there. And I think that's the biggest challenge that people that I work with are working through, is what the skills, the behaviors, the habits, the tools that have helped them to be very successful to the point where they are at are perhaps a very different mix of what they need to go to that next level. So if we use leadership as an example, the skills, the tools, the behaviors that you need to be a very good team leader are very different to what you need to be a good manager. And when people step up from that leadership level into a management level, you need to change how you show up. You change you move from that tactical element into that strategic element. So you need to think differently. You need to respond to things differently. And I think there's an identity piece in there, in that you need to step into that next level. And I think that's a lot of the conversations that I have, are helping people to understand who do they want to be at that next level. What are they, in shredding and leaving behind, and what do they want to bring with them? Who do they want to be as a manager? How do they want to be seen? How do they want people to experience that leadership at the next level? And it's helping them to shape all of that. You're absolutely right. People have all of the answers. It's they don't always have the questions that they need to ask to get to those answers. And that's where I think coaching is such a valuable experience for people, is because we ask the questions to help them to bring those answers to the surface. I think we're thinking partners, essentially. We're asking different questions to help them to explore different perspectives, and when they explore different perspectives, they come up with different options that they might not have seen before. But ultimately, the answers are there, so they would get to them eventually. It's just a more efficient way of and a speedier way of getting there. And I think with a lot of ambitious, high-performing people, they want to get there as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And I think a lot of people recognize that coaching is a great way to be able to do that.
So you said a couple of things there that I think are really important for our listeners. And I just want to make sure that we kind of encapsulate that. And so the first was the tools that got you here may not be the tools that are going to get you to the next level. And so in my mind, that kind of what ran through my mind was maybe a manufacturing plant, and the best machine operator in that plant becomes the supervisor. And that's a natural progression. And so they're really good at doing the job. They understand the job, and now they're managing people, things, but they're not leading, they're just managing. So what I'm drawing a line to, that you said there's a difference between being a manager and a leader. And so those same tools, maybe they're now a really great supervisor, so they come up for promotion to come into a leadership role. They may not be successful with the same tool set. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of recognizing that it's a different skill set. So what makes you very good at being the most experienced on your team is a very different skill set to the skills and attributes of a good leader. And I think we see in a lot of industries that people have been in the role for a little while, they become a senior in that role because they've got the knowledge, they're a subject matter expert in that field. And so then they get promoted into leadership. But leadership is a completely different toolkit. It's a different skill set. And I think we don't always, we don't always upskill before they go into leadership. So it is a completely different skill set. So one of the questions that I explore with clients is, what's the gap between where you are now and where you want to be? And is it a knowledge gap? Is it a skills gap? Or is it an action gap? And when we know what's in that gap, then we can work out what we need to do to bridge that gap. And I think there will be a lot of people who are really good at the jobs that they do and naturally take over some of those behaviors into leadership. and they do become a very good leader, but they'll also be learning other skills along the way. And I think, decision making, or being able to communicate with people in a different way, to influence and to guide and to support, they're all very different skills. And some people will naturally have them through life experience or through work experience, but not everybody will. So I think understanding, okay, what do I need? What tools do I need in my toolkit for me to be a very good leader, or for me to be a very good senior leader? And that will be different. But I think when you understand what is needed, then you can work out what the gaps are, and then you can work out what's needed to fill those gaps to be able to step up to that next level.
I like it. And as I'm kind of thinking, well, one other thing I wanted to go back and just touch on, you mentioned about some of the great things about being a coach. And I think we should mention for our listeners, because many times I get the question of what is the difference? Because for me, I do consulting, coaching, speaking, and training, and those are all different things. And many times I have people come and ask for a coach, but they're looking for a consultant, or vice versa. And so what I tell people is the big difference between a consultant and a coach is, as a consultant, I may do work for you. I will come in, I may have a deliverable. As a coach, I never leave with or very rarely do I leave with a deliverable. You have a deliverable back to me, and I'm holding you accountable. What are your thoughts on what that difference is?
I know, I like that explanation. I think for me, I like the term thinking partner. I like the ethos that the person who's sitting in front of us is a resourceful, experienced person, and that they have the answers, that our role as a coach is to ask them different questions to help them to find their answers. And I totally agree with what you're saying. They set the direction. The question I always ask at the beginning of every coaching session is, what would you like to focus on today? And what would you like the outcome to be from this session? What do you want to walk away with? Whereas I think it's very different for a consultant in that that's sort of that co-working collaboration. So it's very much set by them. I am not bought into the outcome. My role, my responsibility is to understand where they are now and where do they want to get to, and to support and guide them to get from A to B. So I like somebody that I worked with once described it as a guide and an explorer. So I think that's a nice way of putting it as well. So you are there to guide, but ultimately they are the explorer. So they go where they choose to go with it. So I think it's a very equal, then they're not looking to me as the expert, whereas I think with a consultant, they're very much looking at you to have the answers and to tell them what the answers are, and then help them to implement the answers. Whereas I think with coaching, and I do get asked, I think it's a very natural thing for people to say, well, what would you do? Or how did you do this? Or what would you advise? And then being able to say, okay, well, what would you do if, how would you explore this? What do you think your options are? What feels best for you? Rather than guiding them down a particular route. I think it's nice. It's a nice position to be in, to be able to hold that space for somebody to walk around a challenge and explore it from different perspectives. And ask them different questions that you see that very visible response where people go, oh, I hadn't thought of it like that. And I think that it's one of the enjoyable moments about coaching, when you see that light bulb moment where people suddenly see a different option, and they start to explore that and come up with different ideas. And I think the nice thing about that is it's coming from them. It's not me giving them the answers. It's not me suggesting things that they can take away and do. It's just holding that space, which I don't think we get in this world. In this day and age now, we don't have time or space unless we really create it and protect it. We don't naturally have spaces in our day to sit and think or explore or be creative or be curious. And I think that's what I love about coaching is giving that space and holding that space for people to be able to do that.
I like that. And the last thing on coaching that kind of came to mind as you were talking is I often will tell people as well, coaching is all about where you are today to where you want to be. As you said, you called it a gap. And hey, maybe I should use mind the gap as for that. I love it. I'm sorry. But many times people want to concentrate on the past. And what I always tell people is that's where you need a therapist, not, when you're talking about the past instead of the future. And so you have also come up with 5 pillars. You call it your PIPS framework, not to be confused with the apple seed, right? Now, for anybody that doesn't understand, you'll need to look that up in the UK. But anyhow, can you explain a little bit of the PIPS framework to us so that we understand what that is?
Sure. So the PIPS framework is the 5 pillars that I go through with clients to align success. So the first P is for planning. So we know it's really important to plan. I also know that, and I think in particular shaped by my time in the police service, I'm very quick to jump in and take action. So I have a loose plan, I have a fair idea, and then I'm very quick to jump in and take action. What I've learned is that actually, if you spend the time up front planning and get very clear on where you're going, what does success look like? What will it feel like? What will it be? What will be different? What will be different for you? What will be different for people around you? The more you put in the plan, the easier it gets to then implement. So planning is the first P. Then we have intention. So for me, I think it's really important that we show up with intention and we show up with purpose, that we're very intentional about the things that we choose to do and that we align that with the things that are most important to us. So when I talk to my clients about intention, we're talking about aligning their habits and their behaviors with their values, with their philosophies, their ethics, and their principles, and the things that are most important to them. Because we know that a big cause of burnout is misalignment of values, misalignment of principles, misalignment of the way that we show up and behave. So the intention is really important. Identity is the second PIP. So PIPS has the 2 I's. So intention is the first and identity is the second. So much of what we do and how we do is part of our identity, but we also need to know when to separate the identity with what we do and who we are or who we are becoming. So a lot of the work that I do is around habits and behaviors and looking at exploring the habits and behaviors that will help them to create that success. So if we look at leadership, it's looking at, okay, what habits do you need to have as a leader? What's going to help your team to be able to come and talk to you, to be able to come and share and challenge and have those more difficult conversations with you? How do you want to show up as a leader? How do you want to be remembered as a leader? That legacy is all part of the identity. And then we have performance. So we know performance is very individual. What makes a high performer is very unique to each individual. So a lot of the conversations talking around performance is what do you need in place to help you to perform at a high level? So in leadership, one of the things that I talk about with people is you can have a team of 10 people, and all of those 10 people might need you to show up as a leader in different ways to get the best out of them. So a great question in your one-to-ones is to ask people, how can I show up differently to be a better leader for you? What do you need from me to be a good leader for you? Because it will be different for each individual. It's like anybody who's got more than one child knows that you need to show up as a parent slightly differently with each of your children. Yeah, it's not about the love and attention and respect. It's just in terms of your behaviors and how you engage and how you communicate needs to be different to get the best out of people. So when you understand what you need to perform at a high level, it becomes much easier for you to then be able to communicate that to other people. This is what I need from you. This is what I need in place to perform well. But also we need to understand what motivates us. What is it that drives us forward? What is it that helps us to keep going? Where do we need to be more disciplined? And where can we be more consistent? So sometimes it's just one habit change, one behavior change that we can do consistently that can completely change the course. Sometimes we think that it needs to be a very big change for things to be very different, and that's not always the case. So in performance, we look at, okay, what do you need in place to perform at that level? And then the last S is for structure. So the structure holds everything in place and enables everything that comes in before that. It enables that to happen. So if we've identified what our priorities are, and we've identified how we're going to show up with intention to follow that plan, and we've identified what we need in place to perform at a high level, we then need to create a structure that creates and protects that, so that we protect all of those things that we've said are important, and we create a structure that allows for that routine for us to show up in all of those ways that we've said we want to show up in. So that's the PIPS frameworks, is the 5 all work together. They all hold each other in together. My belief is if you follow that framework and you check off all 5 of those pillars, you set yourself up for success, and aligned success, which for me is most important.
I like that. And I think many times I've run into a successful, by all of our standards, a successful person that is not aligned with their own values, and that causes, internal conflict. The other thing I wanted to draw a little bit of attention to was, you said sometimes it is in the performance piece, which is where we're doing all of the things that we've put together, that sometimes it's a very small change, or it's one habit that we change that makes the difference. And John Maxwell once said that he often gets a question, or somebody will come to him and say, I want to be a writer. What would be your suggestion? Because he's written 100 books. And he says that his suggestion is always the same to everybody: start writing with one word. And, a millionaire that has all kinds of money, they didn't get there all at one time. They got there $1 at a time. So I think that is really important for our listeners to realize that any of the changes that you're talking about might only be a very small item, and then done day after day compound into something different. I'm also a little bit curious. You've talked about vision, the planning session. How many times do you run into an executive that they know they want to go somewhere other than where they are, but they don't have a clear vision? Or maybe they think they do, but as you dig into it, it's not really a clear vision. How often does that happen?
More than I think you would expect for somebody who is already at that level. I had a conversation with somebody recently, and I was saying that I was using the analogy of saying that I love working with people who are already halfway up the mountain. So they've already, like you said at the beginning, they've already achieved a lot, but they're not, this isn't the summit for them. There's more to come. They want more. They're driven for more. And we were talking about this analogy, and I asked him and said, where are you on the mountain? And he said, I think I'm about 2/3 of the way up. So I asked him the question. I said, what's the top of the mountain for you? And he didn't know. He didn't know what the top of the mountain was. And he had less than 10 years before retirement age. So, I think there's probably a lot of people that we think have that mapped out, and they've got that vision and they know where they're going. And then what happens when they retire and then come down the other side of the mountain? Not everybody has that mapped out. And I think those are always the interesting conversations to have, to what they think, and also what it is that they actually want. So again, going back to alignment, what they think they should do, where they think they should be, or where they think they should be going or should have got to by now. When you strip all of that back and start asking the question, okay, what is it you want? If you've got 5 working years left, what is it you want to achieve? What would success look like? And if in 5 years' time, what do you want to be true? And I think just giving people that space to explore that again is a great conversations. But I think there's a lot of people that are moving within the flow of what's going on. They're not necessarily creating that flow of where they want to be going.
So for our listeners that might be listening and they feel stuck between where they're currently at, their current success, and what their full potential is, what are a couple of key takeaways that you would tell them you can start today here to start to get unstuck?
Oh, it's a great question. I think stuck is a feeling. It's not always a reality. So I think that would be my first question. Okay, why stuck? What feels stuck and what doesn't feel stuck? Because again, we tend to focus on the negative, don't we? We tend to focus on where the fears or frustrations are. So I think that question to help them to look at it from a different perspective. Okay, what's not stuck? What isn't stuck, and what do you know? Where do you know you want to go, and then build the detail around that. Most people start with the negative. If you ask them what they want, they'll start with what they don't want, and then they work back from there. So I think those questions, okay, what is it you want instead? What would unstuck feel like? Where would you, if you could wake up tomorrow morning and things would be different, what would you want, what most of all, what would you want to be different? But I think if they can identify what is stuck or what's creating that feeling of being stuck, I think that then quite often just shifts things on its own without even making any changes. I think sometimes the mind is a powerful thing, right? I think sometimes that feeling of being stuck is not always the reality of being stuck. And I think look at what's in your circle of control and influence. I think write everything down. The exercise that I tend to do with clients is get it out of your head and onto paper. First things first, because you can't see it when it's inside your head. You need to get it out of your head and onto paper. Then go through and cross out anything that is thoughts or feelings, because that's not fact. It's a very temporary version of the truth. It's not always real. So cross out anything that is a thought or a feeling and focus on what is a fact. Then when you've got your list of facts, and the list is going to keep getting smaller and smaller, then cross off anything that is not in your control or you cannot influence. And then by the end of the exercise, you should then have a very small list of things that you can control, things that you can influence that are factual. And then the next question is, what's the smallest thing on that list that would have the biggest impact? And start with that.
I like it. I'll share a personal story within our own business. Over the past several months, I've picked up several new clients, and which is great, right? And all of a sudden, and the way we do our billing is if I pick up a new client on the 16th of the month, then if they're a retained client, they pay on the 16th of the next month. And however this happened, they all ended up being in the middle of the month. And so I find myself, although I'm successful, I'm using air quotes, and I have all these clients, I find myself at the beginning of every month with no money. And so I'm stressed about that. I'm stuck. What do I do? There's nothing I can do. And finally, one day I sat down and kind of started to lay it out. And I thought, what can I do? Maybe I go back to my clients and ask them if we can change their billing terms, and I can stretch them out so that I can have a few at the beginning of the month, a few in the middle of the month, and a few at the end of the month. And lo and behold, it was not a problem. It was a perceived problem in my mind, but for them, it's just part of doing business, and that's fine. And by next month, we'll have that all straightened out. But I just use that as a real life example that I think we're all prone to it. That we can sometimes get ourselves stuck when the reality is there are lots of things, or at least a few things, that we can do about it. So I want to make sure I give an opportunity for you to mention, where can people get in touch with you if someone's listening and thinking, I got to find Zoe and make her my coach? How can they go about that?
It'd be amazing. So if you search for my name, you'll find me in the usual places. So the website is zoethompson.uk. I'm Zoe Thompson on LinkedIn and zoethompson.uk on Facebook and Instagram. I'm not on Twitter or X, but I'm in other places. But if you head to the website, it's all linked in from there. There's a space there with some free resources, and I'm on YouTube as well. So there's lots of videos and resources on there that will help people, and more conversations like this as well. So yeah, YouTube or the website is probably the best bet.
Awesome. So as we come to a close, I ask all of my guests the same 3 questions at the end, kind of rapid fire. And the first question is really derived out of lots of conversations with business leaders and hearing things like, when I graduated out of high school, they taught us this, or the new recruits that are coming in, they don't have this skill, those types of things. And so my question is, if we could magically get all of the school administrators across the world sitting in front of us, and you had an opportunity to give them one piece of advice of something that they could add to the curriculum or to the student's career that would help us to have a better, well-rounded, participating part of society, what would that one piece of advice be for them?
Communication skills. So often it all comes down to the ability to listen and to communicate effectively.
I like it. Now, the next question is one of my favorites. And just recently, somebody said I'm dating myself by asking this question. Because they said it's the way I ask it, and that is, what over your career has been your go-to book that has continually brought good insights to you and been valuable to you?
That's a great question. I don't have a go-to book in terms of a book that I've returned to, so I don't have a straight answer for that. I read a lot. And I love I love fiction books to switch off, but I love books from different people with very different perspectives because it helps me to think about things differently. The Chimp Paradox was the first one that that made me think differently. But I also love Carol Dweck's Growth Mindset. I think that's a fantastic book. The Coaching Habit. Oh, there's so many that I think I recommend books to people all the time, but it's very much a specific book based on a specific conversation. But I would love other people's recommendations, as I do love reading. So I'm trying to think what's on the bookshelf. But I think The Coaching Habit was a good coaching and leadership book, just about showing up differently. And Brené Brown's Dare to Lead, I thought that was a really good book too. So I think if we're talking about leadership, Brené Brown's Dare to Lead.
Awesome. And the reason that person said I was dating myself was because I did not ask, what is your favorite Facebook reel or Instagram influencer or any of those things. And as a side note, which hopefully you'll see it when it comes out, when we hit 100 episodes, I am going to publish that book list of all of the recommendations from each person. So that will be coming out before too long. And the last question, with all of the software and gadgets and technology that is out there today, what is your most useful favorite piece of technology today?
I have a love-hate relationship with technology. Because there's nothing more I love to switch it all off at the end of the day. But it's so important to the work that I do. I think it would be my phone to keep in touch, but I would love for it to just, do you remember the old days? I'm going to date myself now. The old days where it wasn't full of apps and people couldn't get hold of you all of the time, or had an expectation to be able to get hold of you all of the time. I think a good old pre-smartphone, that's what I like. But I think my phone just for keeping in touch with people. But I could quite happily let a lot of the apps go.
I am the same way, and this is not, I get nothing out of this. I have been investigating, and I'm very close. There's a phone out now called the Minimalist smartphone.
I've seen that.
And I'm
love that idea.
I'm getting closer. And one of my hacks is that I have an iPhone, but I will put it on grayscale from time to time so that it is black and white. And that seems, it makes your interaction much shorter because you're not, going other places and seeing things. So that we'll see. I think when this phone wears out, I will get a minimalist phone, and I'm with you. I'm going backwards. I would much rather not have all of that.
This is too much now. I've not tried grayscale though, so I'm Android, so I will look to see whether or not I have that on my phone. But the do not disturb, turning off all the notifications and airplane mode after a certain time, that helps. But it's so easy to have that habit of just picking it up all the time. So yeah, it's yeah, I'd like to go back to some of the simple things of the earlier days.
I would agree. Zoe, thank you so much for taking time out of your afternoon to spend with us. I've enjoyed the conversation. I hope we can get you back on again. I think we could talk easily for another hour or so. But thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great conversation.
And for our listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to check out some of our recent past episodes. And don't forget to follow us on whatever platform you're listening so you get alerts when they come out. And also at the bottom of the show notes, there will be a link for you. You can sign up to get each episode's guide. We are publishing a guide to go along with each episode so that you can get the most out of it. Until next time, we appreciate you.